swim, your toughest bike, and maybe your toughest run.
Yeah, my toughest swim was in Vermont. It was a massive lake. It's one of the Great Lakes, and it was a point-to-point swim, and so we swam way out around this peninsula. And at this point in the journey, we're well into it, and my body fat, I mean, we're probably 4%. And so we were really struggling with my body retaining heat. And as soon as I got cold, everything started to cramp and my body would shut down. And so we were swimming in Vermont, and I got about 2/3 of the way through, and everything just started to shut down. And so I had a chaperone, and I said, I've got to get to the shore now. So we made a right-hand turn and beelined it in. But I was concerned that as soon as I started cramping, it was going to be, Troubleville. So we got to the shoreline where the water was only about 2 to 3 feet deep, and I just dragged that shoreline until we finished the swim. And it was actually that moment on that we called ahead and we switched all of the open water swims to pool swims because we could control that environment. My body really needed to, even in the pool swims I was getting cold, and so we needed either the hot tub or the shower to bring my core temperature back up so that I could get out and go to the bike rides.
Let me just ask you really quick on the swim, because I know even you had a tough time, you said, on your last swim, the very last one in Deer Creek here in Utah.
Yeah, I was going to switch the last one in Utah to a pool swim, but they assured me that the water temperature was 70 plus degrees. Total lie. I think someone was trying to kill me. But we did the open water anyway. And what had happened was I'd been in a pool for a couple weeks. And so when we were doing the open water, I reintroduced the wetsuit, and we shot out of, the pace was like getting shot out of a cannon to start with. And when I was in the pool, I would take, 500 meters and just warm up and really get into it and get into a rhythm. And so when we took off so fast, and then the cold and the compression from the wetsuit, I've got so much open water experience, but I kind of had a little bit of a panic attack, and I had my guys there around me, and they just, talked me off a ledge and calmed me down, and we really slowed that pace down. And then again, about 2/3 of the way through, I was just shaking so bad. From the cold, we pulled me off onto the rocks, and we tried to we started to try to come up with the ideas and tried to put a wetsuit on me, and the wind was blowing, so I was getting colder, and we were just like, we've just got to swim. And so we pushed me back in the water, and we finished that 700 meters. And I just remember getting out of the water shaking. They threw blankets on me and threw me in the van and turned the heat up. But then once we got on the bike, it was fine. And the rest of the day, man, I just had a blast.
That's awesome. So back to what would have been your toughest bike and your toughest run?
Toughest bike, Connecticut. There were several states that were really hard because of elevation. The cumulative fatigue on my legs, we called ahead and said, look, we need to change the courses. We need to flatten them out as much as we can. A hill to me, or a kicker to me, or rollers to me, became like mountains. I had all slow twitch muscles, and I needed to do rhythm type of riding. And any type of fast acceleration or elevation gains, it just shut me completely down. Easiest gear, real light spinning. And so in some of these states, we just couldn't avoid elevation. And we were in Connecticut, and I remember just being totally by myself, completely demoralized. Anywhere I turned was hills. And I just remember going like 8, 9, 10 miles an hour, just like, I'm going to run out of daylight. And it's in the middle of the campaign, and I'm completely exhausted and emotionally exhausted. I remember just pulling over to the side of the road and just laying there on the ground and just started crying. And the film crew was there, and so they've got good footage of it. But it took me a little bit to get back on the bike. But those were some hard days when, like, the states like Connecticut, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, those were all places where we couldn't. It was just 6,500 feet of climbing every day. And when you're on, at that point, we had done over 25, 30 Ironmans in consecutive days. It's hard for people to understand what the body feels like in those moments. Perception's an amazing thing. We would call and we would say, hey, we need the course to be flattened out. And they were like, yeah, there's just a few little small rollers. And I would get there and I'd be like, man, these aren't rollers. It's a roller to you, but to me these are mountains. And a lot of days we would adjust, we'd call an audible and adjust the course on the fly. And we would find a good flat, 10, 20 mile piece of road, and we would just loop that section because it was the flattest piece we could find. Ultimately, that's what got us through most of the rides. Now, my toughest run, I can't remember the state exactly, but it was early on. Oh man, I do remember. I was having incredible issues with my toes, my feet. We ended up cutting out the top part of my shoe. I remember stopping at it was like 11 o'clock at night and trying to find some lidocaine spray just because my toe had so much pressure in it we couldn't release it. I ultimately ended up walking most of that marathon. I think we finished at 3:30 in the morning, just trying to get it done. It was pretty early. It was in the first 20 states. Yeah, that was a rough day. And once my body started to adapt, though, my strength is the bike. But as we progressed through the journey, the bike became more difficult for me just because it was 7 hours in the saddle every single day. We were riding with other riders, and some of them were real squirrely, and every time I got off the bike without crashing, I was just like, okay, I can go now run. And the run became kind of like just like relaxing time for me because I could control that environment, and I knew my body at that moment, or at the marathon portion of it, that I could just kind of click and cruise through it. And so the marathon became, my comfort zone. I knew I could just cruise all day at whatever pace I was doing. I could tune people out or talk to people, and no one was going to affect me or take me out. And so the run kind of became like my time.
Cathartic time for you.
Yeah, my time, my thinking time. And that's the time when I had my phone too, and I could, either text friends at home or, talk about what happened during the day with the crew. And it just became, my time. One of the tougher bike ride days was race number 18 in Tennessee. It was 106 degrees. My body was still just getting hammered by the fatigue. And at that point, I hadn't fully adjusted, and I could fall asleep in 2 to 3 seconds. And so Tennessee, when I get into the aero bars, I'd conditioned my heart rate to be so low while working out. I mean, I was doing these bike rides at 103 heart rate. And I'd get into the aero bars, and with the road kind of just mesmerizing you, and I could settle into just a pace. Well, in Tennessee, it's 106, my heart rate's super low, I'm just cruising along, going to my aero bars, and like within 2 seconds, I fell asleep. And it happened in previous rides, but as I'd start to go, I'd catch it. And, when you're driving and you're like, oh, well, that's bad news. But this time in Tennessee, I didn't catch it, and man, I hit the pavement, and I joke and I say the asphalt's one of the worst alarm clocks there is on the planet. That really affected me because I had tons of road rash. I got some fluid in my hip. I couldn't, it really hurt to sleep. And that crash happened at mile 30, and so I had to get back on, bike 82 more miles, and then go run a marathon that night. And so really physically, mentally, that was probably one of the tougher rides as well. I'd forgotten about. I'd blocked that out.